Hi there, I'm Winifred Costello, owner and magical entrepreneur of AwenTree. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about choosing a tarot deck that speaks to you, also known as how to choose the right tarot deck. So this is really important when you're getting started with tarot. And I really can't impress that enough on you. That getting the right deck is vital to building a relationship with tarot. If you feel like you've gotten a deck and it's not the right deck, no worries. We can get you headed in the right direction and starting to look at and consider ideas to get you working with the right deck. So when students ask me how to pick the right deck for them or how to choose a deck that speaks to them, I usually like to ask them two questions. My first question is to ask, how new to tarot are they? Would they consider themselves an absolute beginner, a total rookie, or what we would call a newbie? Have they never owned a deck? Have they never strolled on the internet and looked at different tarot websites? Don't own any books? We're talking completely new to tarot. That will affect what I offer as suggestions for a tarot deck to start looking at for the beginning. Also, too, I'll ask a student, what is their learning style? For someone who's very visually prompted by their cards, and if you are sighted or a person with sight, tarot cards are visual. They're about being visual. We are visually prompted by the imagery in the cards. But also, in addition to that, it's important to understand how you learn. And I'm going to explain that in a second. So first off, if you are a total rookie to tarot, I'm probably going to recommend that you start with a deck known as the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, also called the Pamela Colman Smith Tarot. Now, this deck comes in some variations, some modernized variations. It's also the same deck, relatively speaking, as the Radiant Tarot deck and the Universal Tarot deck. They're all very, very similar. They're just colored slightly different to soften the imagery in the cards, but by and large, they are visually the same deck. You're looking at the same style deck. So if you are totally new to tarot, I usually recommend that the Rider-Waite is a really good place to start. And if depending on how you like to learn, if you are someone who likes to learn exactly, like follow along in a book or on a website. So what do I mean by that? So if you have a book on tarot and you're reading about it, and it's important to you that when the author of the tarot book or the author of a website where you're reading tarot material is describing a card, if it's important to you that your card looks exactly like what the teacher is describing, then you're going to probably want to start with the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. Most teachers, authors, and websites are referencing what we would call the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. Either they're using the Radiant version of it or the Universal version of it, but they are most frequently referencing that. So if you're going to get tripped up when if your deck looks like rather different than the Rider-Waite deck in its artistic depiction, if that's going to trip you up, then probably a safe bet is that you're going to want to start with the Rider-Waite deck. Now, what deck am I talking about? I have a copy here just to hold up real quick so you guys can see. So this is the Rider-Waite Tarot. This is just the standard version. So for instance, if you're on a site or in a book and they're describing the Ace of Cups and it matters to you that what you're reading about and what's being described looks exactly like the card you're holding in your hand, then you might want to start with this deck. If you are a more flexible learner, then that's not so important. So the benefits of the Rider-Waite deck is how popular it is and how extensively written about that deck is. So those are some benefits of starting with the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. Now that said, there are some drawbacks that people feel about that deck. One, it has a very medieval look and feel to it. So some of the imagery is very medieval. Also, two, due to the time period of when it was printed, the coloring can be considered quite sharp for some people. And so that doesn't really resonate for some folks, artistically speaking. So there are some drawbacks to the Rider-Waite deck. It's a great deck, but some people don't connect into the imagery or the cultural perspective of the deck because it does have a strong medieval ages feel, especially when we consider cards like the Hierophant, the Emperor, the court cards. A look and feel that's very middle age. It also is rather masculine looking, meaning that most of the people depicted in it are masculine, except for the queens. So there's a few times when there's clearly female figures in the card, but by and large it's a rather masculine emphasized deck, so that doesn't resonate for some folks too. So now moving on to things, this kind of moves us into how to pick the right deck for you. So you could choose your deck by just going with the Rider-Waite deck is a great teaching deck, great starting point, great, fabulous. I'm just going to start there. That's fine. That's perfectly wonderful and great place to start. The whole point here is of these videos is to help you get out of your own way and get past obstacles and get working with the cards. So if the Rider-Waite deck works for you, fabulous. Go for it. So now for those of you in the camp of feeling like you can't connect to the imagery, you don't like the sharp tones, there's a lot of masculine figures in the deck. If that stuff's not working for you, you might want to start looking at some of these other modern decks out there. And there are so many, as many creatives and artists and visionary folks have come forward to make their decks. Their choices are like almost endless. There's just so many decks to choose from, and they're all really amazing and gorgeous. So usually what I start to talk about are these different categories. So how do you look at all those cards and start to understand how to connect to a card and get the right deck for you? So I kind of break it down into categories. First of all, I do think of it artistically. Think about the deck artistically. Now, decks come in all kinds of what we would call like artistic expressions. So a deck may have digital art, something we call digital art, where the art is literally created digitally. Say that 5 times fast. So then also too, you can look at a deck where the art is not digital. So a good sample of a not digital created deck is, there are many samples, but here's a great one that I really love. This is the Guy in Tarot. Hold that right up for you. This is by Joanna Powell Colbert. I love this deck. This is a beautiful deck. So these are printed from the originals of her deck are colored pencil drawings, and she's an amazing artist. And so the imagery is originally from drawn pictures, colorized, but drawn pictures, right? So same with something such as, this is the Druid Craft deck. This art was originally done by hand. I'm sorry, I can't tell you if it was painted or drawn, but this is not a digital art. This is drawn. There's nothing wrong with digital art decks. Personally, for me, I tend to not really resonate strongly with digital art created decks. There are beautiful decks out there. I recommend them all the time. I can value and appreciate them, but personally for me reading, I know enough about my style that I like the hand-drawn art a little bit more. It just speaks to me a little bit deeper. It has a softer energy. So that is what works for me. So one of the things you want to think about is how the artist has expressed the deck. Are they doing digital art? Or are they doing hand-drawn art? Hand-drawn, I mean that it's not digital. So that's one thing, is to think about the artistic approach around the deck. Another thing to think about is the cultural and spiritual properties of the deck. So there are all different kinds of decks out there with all different kind of cultural and spiritual nuances that are really exciting to think about. But it is important that your deck that you're working with is culturally and spiritually speaking to you, that it makes sense. So there are feminist decks, such as the Mother Peace or the Daughters of the Moon Tarot deck. Those have a strong feminist property to them. There are like pagan decks. There are earth-centered spirituality decks where nature is very strong. There are tarot decks centered around animals. There's just many choices to pick from. So culturally and spiritually speaking, you're going to want to think about that. And what you want is a deck that draws you in. You want a deck that talks to you, that compels you to want to look at it and hold it. You want to be engaged by the deck. If you're feeling like the deck is kind of doing something I call kicking you out, like you just can't get into the images, just can't connect it, or if it's spiritually or culturally just isn't syncing for you, it's probably not the right deck for you. Doesn't mean it's not a great deck, it's just not the right deck for you. So you want to be thinking about cultural, artistic, and spiritual properties and energies represented into the deck, because that is going to impact your ability to get comfortable with your cards, which ultimately impacts your ability to learn the cards and to give and receive readings. So those are really important things. Some other things that you want to think about with a deck is a physicality. The size of the deck can matter. If you've got really small hands, a really large deck can be more challenging to shuffle, and you're going to want to be able to shuffle your deck comfortably. So if that is a game breaker for you, then that's important to think about. So tarot decks come in all different sizes. Again, I've got some here. So something like the Green Witch Tarot, I'll hold that one up. and the guy in tarot, you can see, let me get them up there for you, that they are, you can see that they are different sizes. So that matters too. Some people really love the big cards because the imagery is so rich and lush, and you can really get lost in the picture because you got these big, beautiful cards. Some people want to go with a smaller card because it's easier to hold in your hands and shuffle. It's totally personal. The thing is that you want to explore and try and get to know what's right for you. And let's just go back over things. Let's just recap what we've talked about today. So today we're talking about how to get the right tarot deck that speaks to you. So if you are super new and depending on your learning style, you may want to stay with the tried and true Rider-Waite tarot deck, also known as the Pamela Coleman Smith deck. People often get the version of it called the Radiant Rider-Waite or the Universal because the colors are a little softer, because as I showed earlier, based on the time period this deck originally was printed, the colors, let me hold it really close, the colors are kind of sharp. So you're going to want to, if you are new, you may want to consider starting out there, especially if you want your cards to look like how the books are referencing or the websites that are, there's so many websites with great information. You're going to want to, if you want your card to look like what's being described in a book, most likely you're going to want to start with the Rider-Waite deck. If that deck doesn't speak to you energetically, visually, culturally, then you want to start thinking about looking at and exploring and thinking about decks that have different kinds of art. So you want to look at a deck and consider its artwork. Do you like the format of the art, whether it's digital or some sort of hand-generated art? Could be collage. There's all kinds of decks out there. You have to think about the cultural and spiritual aspects of the deck. Does it make sense to you? Does it feel like home? Does it resonate? So some key things are to, you really enjoy looking at the deck. You really want to keep going back to it. It excites you. You feel like you can see a story unfolding in the cards or spend some time looking at the cards. It's pleasing to you. It stimulates your creative mind, your intuitive side. Those are good indicators that you're probably connecting with a deck that's going to work for you. You also want to think about the practical things like the size of the deck. Decks come in all different sizes and shapes, and an important thing is to be able to comfortably shuffle your deck because you're going to be spending a lot of time with it. So those are some good starting points to get you started with choosing the right deck for you. I just want to say thanks for being here today, and if you have any questions regarding tarot, I would love to hear them for you. Throw them in the comment box. And I just again want to thank you for being here, and we'll talk soon. Have a great day.